She thought she had all the power, the HOA Karen who's been terrorizing me for years. But the moment I stepped back onto my valley cabin, her face went pale. She couldn't believe it. Not a single word left her mouth. You see, she had no idea I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the entire valley. And what she thought was hers. All of it mine. Stick around, because what happened next changed everything. And she got the shock of her life. I hadn't been back to my valley cabin in over 5 years. Life had a way of pulling me in 1,000 directions, leaving the cabin abandoned, dusty, and silent. Every time I thought about returning, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. Excitement because this place was mine, the place I had dreamed about owning since I was a kid. Dread because of the HOA. Specifically, HOA Karen. HOA Karen wasn't just a regular board member. She was the type of person who thrived on control. She had power in the neighborhood, or at least she thought she did. She would enforce rules with precision, demand compliance, and punish anyone who dared to step out of line. For years, I had heard stories, through letters, phone calls, and local gossip, of her bullying behavior. She fined people for planting the wrong flowers, for leaving a car parked in the wrong direction, for even things that made no sense. And now, after years away, I was about to return to my little slice of paradise, right under her watchful, judgmental eyes. I remember driving down the long winding road that led to the valley. The sun was low in the sky, painting the hills with warm orange and pink hues. The air smelled like pine and wet earth from a recent rain. I could feel my heart pounding, a mixture of anticipation and fear. As I turned the final corner, my cabin came into view. It was smaller than some of the newer homes in the valley, but it was perfect. Every wooden beam, every window, every stone path had been carefully chosen by me. This was my sanctuary, my home. But it wasn't empty. Not by a long shot. Across the road, standing with arms crossed and a glare that could cut glass, was HOA Karen. She had recognized my car immediately. I could see it in her expression, the surprise, the irritation, the disbelief. She had expected me to be gone forever, or at least thought I'd never come back to challenge her rules. I parked the car slowly, trying to look casual, but I could feel the weight of her stare on me. The closer I got to the cabin, the tighter my chest felt. Memories of our past encounters came rushing back. Letters mailed with fines for trivial things. Angry phone calls demanding that I comply or face consequences. Even rumors spread among neighbors questioning my sanity, suggesting I was difficult or uncooperative. All of it was orchestrated by her, a woman who thrived on control. She stepped closer as I stepped out of the car, her face red with frustration. "You're back," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "I didn't think you'd ever return." "I'm back," I replied calmly, though inside my heart was racing. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me shaken. "And I intend to stay." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, we'll see about that. There are rules here. You can't just ignore them." I smiled faintly, a smile that I kept tight and measured. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. She could feel it. There was something different about me this time. Something stronger, more determined. I wasn't just returning to my cabin. I was returning with power she couldn't even imagine. As I walked up the path to my front door, I noticed the small things she had tried to control while I was gone. The new fence she insisted I didn't need. The landscaping that looked perfect from a distance but was clearly chosen to provoke me. Every detail screamed her authority. And every detail reminded me that she didn't know the full story. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. I unlocked the cabin door, and as I stepped inside, the smell of old wood and faint pine hit me. It was exactly as I remembered, but with a layer of dust that spoke of neglect. I ran my hand along the table I had built, traced the edges of the window sill I had polished years ago, and felt a deep sense of calm wash over me. This was my space, my rules, my life. Yet, the tension lingered. I knew HOA Karen wasn't going to disappear. I knew she would try to assert control as soon as she could. And I was ready. But I wasn't ready to reveal everything just yet. Not until the time was right. This was my valley, my cabin, my life. And I was finally back. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains, I thought about what had brought me here. 5 years ago, I had left not because I wanted to, but because I had been forced out, pressured by fines, threats, and endless harassment. Every attempt to stand up to the HOA had been met with resistance, every complaint ignored, every neighbor convinced by Karen's charm and manipulation. I had no choice but to leave, at least temporarily. But life has a way of giving second chances. I had spent years quietly preparing, quietly learning, quietly planning. I had acquired documents, researched property laws, and confirmed something nobody in the HOA knew. I had full legal ownership of not just the cabin, but the entire valley. Every inch of land surrounding me, every path, every stream, every grove of trees, it was mine. And I wasn't just returning to reclaim my cabin. I was returning to reclaim my life. To take back what was mine. To finally show HOA Karen, and everyone who had supported her, that the rules she had wielded as weapons didn't matter anymore. I had the law on my side. I had proof. And I had patience. As the night deepened, the stars appearing above the valley, I felt a strange mix of serenity and anticipation. The battle hadn't begun yet, but I could sense it coming. HOA Karen would escalate. She always did. And I would have to be ready, not just to defend my cabin, but to confront the web of social and legal manipulation she had spun. I could hear the distant sound of her voice, probably already calling neighbors, probably already plotting. But I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I sat quietly on the porch, letting the cool night air fill me with determination. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. This was about justice. About reclaiming my space. About showing that no amount of bullying, manipulation, or rules could take away what was rightfully mine. The first night back was peaceful in appearance, but under the surface, the storm had already started. I could feel it coming. I could feel the tension building. And I knew one thing for certain. When HOA Karen realized just how much I actually owned, she wouldn't know what hit her. And that, I promised myself, would be the beginning of the reckoning. I woke up the next morning feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. The valley was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. But I knew the calm wouldn't last long. HOA Karen never let things rest. She thrived on chaos, on control, on making everyone else feel powerless. And now that I was back, I was the new target, her favorite kind of problem. Within the first hour of daylight, I noticed her car parked just beyond the edge of my property. The same sharp glare I had seen yesterday morning was now accompanied by movement. Neighbors drifting over, casually, or so they thought, to check in. I could feel her calculating, watching, planning. Every step I took toward the cabin, she mirrored with her eyes, sometimes leaning slightly out of her car window as if she wanted to intimidate me. It wasn't long before the first warning letter appeared. I found it pinned to my cabin door, the kind of letter meant to strike fear. It cited minor violations that didn't even exist, claims that my property was unsightly, that my fence didn't conform to HOA guidelines, that I had planted vegetation too close to the property line. Every word was calculated to frustrate me. I had read these letters before, so I didn't panic. But inside, I felt the familiar tension rising. I went to the window to see HOA Karen standing on the path, talking loudly with a neighbor who was clearly intimidated by her. I could hear snatches of their conversation. "She can't just do whatever she wants," Karen said. "We have rules. We have authority. She'll learn that the hard way." I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was here. This wasn't just about a cabin. This was about standing up to someone who had spent years making people feel small, powerless, and trapped by rules that were meant to control rather than protect. I had learned long ago that fear and intimidation could be broken, but it required patience, evidence, and strategy. Over the next few days, Karen's campaign escalated. She called the local police twice, claiming that I had trespassed on neighboring properties, even though I hadn't. She held informal meetings with other residents, subtly spreading rumors that I was a problematic neighbor, or litigious and difficult. She seemed to take particular pleasure in involving the neighbors, manipulating them into believing I was the villain. The stress was overwhelming at times. I had sleepless nights, wondering if I was overestimating my ability to stand against her, or if the HOA could somehow find a loophole in the law. But then I reminded myself of the truth. The valley, the cabin, every inch of land around me, was legally mine. HOA Karen had no real authority over property I owned. Her power was only as strong as people's belief in it. And that was where her real weakness lay. One afternoon, Karen confronted me directly on my porch. She was furious, her face red with frustration. "You think you can just come back here and do whatever you want?" she demanded, her voice sharp and trembling slightly with anger. "I'm telling you, you are going to follow the rules like everyone else." I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't flinch. "I always follow the rules," I said softly, "but I also follow the law. And according to my records, this entire valley belongs to me." Her face froze. For a brief moment, she seemed caught off guard, as if she hadn't expected me to have this knowledge, this confidence. But then she recovered quickly, masking her surprise with a sneer. "You think property lines and deeds matter more than community rules? We'll see about that." And so, the game escalated. Over the next few weeks, Karen issued more fines, more warnings, more threats. I ignored most of them, letting them pile up, all the while documenting every interaction, every attempt to harass me. I knew this would be critical later. Every phone call, every letter, every meeting I attended, I recorded details meticulously. I also quietly reached out to a lawyer familiar with HOA disputes. I explained the situation, showed them the property deeds, and received reassurance that the law was firmly on my side. But legal preparation was only one side of the battle. Socially, Karen was still trying to isolate me, to make me feel like an outsider. She whispered to neighbors, spread subtle rumors, and made casual, concerned visits to my cabin. She painted me as arrogant, difficult, and uncooperative. Some neighbors were uncertain, some hesitant, and a few outright sided with her out of fear. I realized that winning this conflict wasn't just about law, it was about perception. I had to show that Karen's rules weren't universal, that her authority was limited, and that she was overstepping. Slowly, I began building my own network. I spoke honestly with neighbors, shared small truths about the property ownership, and subtly encouraged them to verify facts for themselves. Curiosity began to spread. Questions were asked. Doubts crept into the stories Karen had told for years. One evening, I found Karen watching me from a distance again. I waved casually, pretending not to notice her intensity. But in that moment, I could see her frustration bubbling over. She had underestimated me, and she hated it. Every calculated move of hers was now being countered, not aggressively, but deliberately. I wasn't reacting out of anger, I was acting with patience and strategy. The tension between us reached its peak one weekend when Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. She demanded that I appear to answer for multiple violations that, in reality, didn't exist. The community gathered, curious and tense. Karen spoke with authority, pointing out supposed offenses, painting me as reckless and dismissive. But I calmly presented my evidence. I showed deeds, property maps, and legal records proving that I owned the valley and the cabin. The room fell silent. The neighbors who had once hesitated now stared, unsure of what to believe. Karen's expression shifted from confidence to panic, her voice faltering. This can't be right," she muttered, scanning the documents. It was the first real crack in her armor. For years, she had relied on assumptions, on fear, and on her reputation to maintain control. But the facts were undeniable. I owned the valley. Legally, completely, without dispute. And for the first time, Karen had no leverage. Still, she didn't give up. She argued, she protested, and she tried to manipulate the neighbors once more. But by now, enough doubt had been planted. People began asking questions, quietly questioning her authority. The social control she had wielded for years was starting to crumble, and she could feel it. That night, I sat on my porch, exhausted but exhilarated. The battle was far from over. Karen would not concede easily. She would continue trying to intimidate, to spread rumors, to assert her so-called authority. But for the first time, I knew I had the upper hand. I had evidence, I had patience, and I had the truth. The valley was mine, and now so was the leverage. I just had to wait for the right moment to strike, not out of anger, but out of justice. Out of the need to finally reclaim my space, my life, and the peace that had been stolen from me by someone who had thought power was theirs to wield. And deep down, I could already sense it. The look on Karen's face when she realized the full extent of what she had been trying to control, the shock, the disbelief. That moment would come. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same in the valley again. After the HOA meeting, I knew the fight wasn't over. HOA Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She was relentless, manipulative, and skilled at twisting situations to her advantage. If I wanted to win, I had to prepare meticulously, legally, socially, and strategically. It wasn't just about standing my ground anymore. It was about exposing the truth, protecting my property, and ensuring that Karen's control over the valley ended once and for all. The first step was to gather evidence. I spent hours going through old property records, tax documents, and legal deeds. Each piece of paper I held was a reminder of the power I had all along, proof that the valley was mine. But it wasn't just about having the documents. I needed them to tell a story, to make it impossible for anyone, including Karen, to deny the truth. I made digital copies, highlighted critical sections, and organized everything in chronological order. It felt almost like preparing for a trial, and in a way, that's exactly what it was. Next, I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation in detail, from Karen's harassment and fines to the social manipulation she had orchestrated among neighbors. The lawyer reviewed all my evidence and reassured me, legally, I was untouchable. Every letter, every fine, every threat from Karen was unenforceable. She had been relying on fear and reputation, not law. That knowledge gave me confidence, but I knew it wasn't enough. Legal strength alone couldn't dismantle her control. I needed allies, witnesses, and a strategy to sway public perception. I started with my neighbors. At first, I was cautious, careful not to alarm them or push them away. I casually mentioned small truths about property ownership, letting curiosity grow naturally. I shared stories about the valley's history, pointed out details that few people knew, and encouraged them to verify things themselves. Some neighbors were hesitant. They had lived under Karen's influence for years, unsure if challenging her was safe. But others were intrigued. Questions were asked. Doubts began to surface. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Mr. Reynolds, became an unexpected ally. He had always been fair-minded, respected in the community, and, most importantly, skeptical of Karen's excessive authority. Over coffee, I walked him through the property records and showed him the legal documents proving my ownership. His eyes widened as he processed the information. "So all these years, she's been bluffing?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Exactly," I said. "She's been trying to control what's legally mine, and some people just assumed she was right." Word spread slowly, quietly at first. Neighbors began asking me questions instead of blindly believing Karen's narrative. Some came by to verify my documents, others just to hear my side of the story. The social tide was shifting, and Karen could feel it even if she didn't yet know exactly what was happening. Meanwhile, I dug deeper into the HOA's own records. I reviewed meeting minutes, budgets, and internal memos, looking for inconsistencies, overreaches, or anything that could show the community, and eventually authorities, that Karen's actions were not only excessive but potentially illegal. It was tedious work, but every small discovery added to my growing arsenal. I found repeated cases where fines were applied inconsistently, rules were misrepresented, and decisions were made without proper board approval. Each note, each piece of evidence, became another brick in the wall I was quietly building to expose her. At the same time, I maintained a calm and composed presence in the neighborhood. I didn't argue loudly or engage in petty conflicts. I simply acted with confidence, letting my demeanor speak for itself. Karen tried multiple times to provoke me, showing up unexpectedly, making thinly veiled threats, and even attempting to rally neighbors against me. But by now, I was ready. I stayed calm, smiled politely, and sometimes even subtly hinted at the legal and historical reality of the valley. Those hints planted seeds of doubt, small but powerful. One particular evening, I organized a casual gathering at the cabin. It wasn't a formal meeting, just an excuse for neighbors to come together, enjoy the valley, and see the property for themselves. Karen found out about it and tried to intimidate people into not attending, claiming it was unauthorized and against HOA rules. To my surprise, most neighbors ignored her. They had questions, curiosity, and some courage sparked by the small truths I had shared over the past few weeks. At the gathering, I let people explore, asked questions about what they noticed, and casually mentioned historical facts about the property ownership. Neighbors looked at me differently now. There was a subtle respect, an acknowledgement that I wasn't just another resident. I was the person who had been wronged, the person with evidence, the person who could quietly but effectively challenge Karen's narrative. By the end of the evening, I had several neighbors willing to vouch for me if needed. They were my witnesses, my social proof, my allies in the coming confrontation. Meanwhile, Karen grew increasingly desperate. I could see it in her expressions, the way she watched me from a distance, and the way she tried to manipulate conversations whenever I walked past. She had underestimated me. She had thought that my absence meant she could continue controlling the valley unopposed. But now, the balance was shifting. She could feel her influence slipping, and I could sense the panic beneath her composed facade. During this period, I also started documenting every interaction meticulously. Emails, phone calls, letters, casual encounters, all logged with dates, times, and details. I knew that if this escalated to a legal battle or a public confrontation, these records would serve as undeniable proof of Karen's harassment and overreach. Each entry was another layer of protection, another step toward justice. But beyond strategy and documentation, I also relied on patience. Karen was impulsive, reactive, and eager to control every situation immediately. I, on the other hand, moved slowly, deliberately, letting tension build while gathering my advantage. Every letter I received, every rumor she spread, only reinforced my resolve. I wasn't just preparing to defend myself. I was preparing to reveal the full truth in a way that couldn't be ignored. By the end of the month, I had everything in place. Legal evidence, social allies, and meticulously documented interactions. The valley, my cabin, and the surrounding land were mine, both in reality and in perception. The community had begun to question Karen's authority, and I had a growing group of neighbors willing to support the truth. The pieces were set. The moment I had been waiting for was approaching, the confrontation that would finally expose Karen, reveal my rightful ownership, and show the entire valley the limits of her so-called authority. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Karen would fight, resist, and try to twist the narrative one last time. But I was ready, and this time, I held the undeniable advantage. Sitting on my porch late at night, looking at the valley bathed in moonlight, I felt a sense of quiet anticipation. The calm before the storm. Everything was aligned, the legal evidence, the social allies, the documented interactions. Karen was about to realize that power built on fear, manipulation, and false assumptions was fragile. And when the truth came crashing down, it would be impossible to ignore. The valley had been quiet for too long under Karen's control. It was time for that to end. And I knew that when the moment arrived, the shock, disbelief, and finally the justice would be unforgettable. Not just for Karen, but for everyone in the neighborhood who had watched, uncertain, for so many years. This was more than just a fight over property. It was a fight for respect, for fairness, and for the right to live without harassment. And for the first time, I knew that I was going to win. The day of the confrontation arrived like a storm rolling over the valley. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, maybe even months, and now it was finally here. HOA Karen had called another emergency meeting, claiming there were serious violations I had committed. But this time, I wasn't walking in unprepared. This time, I held the truth, the law, and the community's curiosity on my side. I arrived early, carrying a folder with all my evidence: property deeds, historical records, photographs, letters, emails, everything I had meticulously collected. I set it down in front of me on the table where the HOA board usually gathered. My neighbors were already there, quietly curious. I could feel their eyes on me, some skeptical, some quietly supportive. And then I saw her, Karen. Her expression was a mixture of arrogance and barely concealed panic. She thought she had this meeting under control. She thought she could intimidate me as she had in the past. She couldn't have been more wrong. Karen started with her usual theatrics, pointing at the documents in front of her, speaking with authority. "You have violated multiple HOA rules," she said sharply. "You've ignored fines, you've altered your property, and you continue to act as if you're above the rules. This behavior will not be tolerated." I stayed calm, taking a deep breath. "I'm happy to go over everything," I said slowly, making eye contact with the neighbors in the room. "Because I think there's a misunderstanding here about rules, fines, and property ownership." She scowled. "Misunderstanding? There is no misunderstanding. The rules are clear." I opened my folder and began presenting the evidence in a calm, deliberate voice. I showed the original property deeds, proving that I legally owned the cabin and the surrounding land. I showed letters and emails from previous interactions, highlighting instances where fines were misapplied and rules misrepresented. I walked through every claim she had made over the years and methodically proved it was either false or irrelevant to my legal ownership. The room grew quiet. The neighbors were listening closely now, reading along, seeing the facts unfold. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to argue, but I anticipated every tactic. I had rehearsed this confrontation in my mind 1,000 times. Each time she attempted to derail me, I calmly redirected the conversation back to the undeniable truth: the valley was mine. Finally, I laid out the full scope of ownership. "This isn't just about the cabin," I said, spreading out a large map of the valley. "This is the land surrounding it, the streams, the paths, the hills. Every inch belongs to me legally. I followed the law, I paid my taxes, and I maintained my property. Your fines, your letters, your attempts to control me, they have no legal standing. And now the entire community knows the truth." Karen's face went pale. I saw the mask slip for just a moment, the confidence cracking under the weight of reality. She stammered, "Titch, that can't be right." A few neighbors leaned forward. "Wait, so all this time," one whispered, "she owns everything?" Another nodded, finally seeing the discrepancy between Karen's authority and the actual facts. Whispers spread through the room, growing louder as people began to question everything Karen had said over the years. Karen's panic became more visible. She tried to assert control again, her voice rising. "You can't just come in here and claim ownership. The HOA has rules." I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. "I respect the HOA rules where they apply. But they do not apply to land that is legally mine. The law is clear, and so are these records." I gestured to the documents and the map. "I am willing to work with the community on cooperation and maintenance, but I cannot and will not comply with arbitrary rules that attempt to control land that isn't yours to control." By now, the room was buzzing. The neighbors who had once blindly supported Karen were asking questions, verifying facts, and expressing surprise. Some admitted they had assumed she was correct simply because she had always acted confident, controlling, and relentless. Others admitted they had been intimidated by her in the past. The social power Karen had held for years was crumbling in real time. Karen's face contorted in anger and disbelief. She leaned forward, her hands shaking slightly. You can't do this. People will listen to me. I am the HOA board. You'll regret this." I remained calm, almost gentle in my response. Karen, this isn't about regret. This is about fairness, law, and respect. The truth is undeniable. And now, everyone here can see it too. It was in that moment that I noticed the subtle shift in the room. People were no longer intimidated. Some looked at Karen with a mix of pity and frustration. Others were clearly impressed by my composure and the thoroughness of my evidence. Karen's words were losing power with every passing second. Then I delivered the final piece, the moment I had been building toward quietly for months. I spread out the large-scale map of the entire valley, pointing to boundaries, paths, and property lines. This isn't just my cabin. This is my valley, I said slowly. All of it. Every inch. And while I've tried to be patient and fair, the attempts to control, intimidate, and manipulate me end today. The room went silent. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. Her mouth opened, then closed, and opened again, as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. The authority she had clung to for so long was evaporating in front of everyone. For the first time, she had no script, no rules to hide behind, no allies fully willing to defend her. Neighbors began to speak up, asking questions, expressing surprise, and slowly, one by one, recognizing the truth of my words. I watched as Karen's panic turned into fury, and then into helplessness. She tried to regain control, but her words now sounded desperate, unconvincing, and empty. I closed my folder, standing tall. The valley is mine, legally and fairly. The HOA has no authority here beyond cooperation, which I am happy to discuss. But intimidation, harassment, and false claims will no longer be tolerated. Karen turned red, her hands clenched at her sides. She realized in that moment that the game had changed. The social and legal power she had wielded so effectively was gone. And she knew it. As the meeting ended, I could feel the shift in the community. People who had once feared her now saw the reality. I had remained calm, prepared, and factual, and the truth had spoken louder than intimidation ever could. Karen stormed out, furious, her authority shattered, her face pale with disbelief. I stayed behind, quietly speaking with neighbors who had questions, guiding them through the documents, answering concerns, and finally showing them the full extent of ownership and the facts of the situation. Slowly, I could see trust forming, respect returning, and a sense of justice settling over the valley. That night, as I walked back to my cabin under the moonlight, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The confrontation had gone exactly as I had planned, not because I was stronger physically, but because I was prepared, calm, and patient. I had faced years of harassment, manipulation, and intimidation, and finally, I had turned the tables. HOA Karen had lost, both legally and socially. The valley was mine. The neighbors had seen the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt the peace I had been fighting for. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Karen would likely try to find another way to assert control, to recover some sense of power. Yet, now, the balance had shifted irreversibly. She could no longer manipulate fear or misinformation to dominate the valley. I had won the battle, but vigilance was still necessary. And as I sat on the porch that night, the moonlight reflecting off the valley's streams and hills, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. The confrontation was over. Justice had been served. And the valley, my cabin, and my life were finally, completely mine. I had reclaimed not just property, but peace, respect, and a sense of personal justice that had been missing for far too long. The emotional satisfaction was profound. For years, I had been frustrated, angry, and anxious, unable to fully enjoy my property or life because of Karen's constant interference. But now, the valley was mine, fully and completely. I had proven to myself and everyone else that patience, preparation, and steadfastness could overcome even the most manipulative adversaries. The struggle had been long, but the payoff was undeniable. Looking back, I realized that this conflict had taught me more than just legal or strategic skills. It had taught me about resilience, the importance of gathering allies, and the power of truth. HOA Karen had relied on fear, misinformation, and social pressure. I relied on facts, calm persistence, and careful preparation. And in the end, that approach worked. There was also a sense of poetic justice in the situation. Karen had spent years controlling, manipulating, and intimidating people in the valley. She had believed that rules, fines, and social dominance could give her absolute power. But when faced with undeniable truth, she crumbled. Her authority was gone, her credibility destroyed, and her influence reduced to whispers of what used to be. Justice, in the quietest and most satisfying way, had been served. I spent that evening on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. The streams shimmered, the trees swayed gently, and the mountains rose in majestic silence. I felt a deep connection to the land, a sense of ownership that went beyond paperwork or deeds. This was my sanctuary, my victory, and my life. HOA Karen's absence, her retreat, and her inability to recover authority were reminders that manipulation and intimidation can only go so far. Facts, preparation, and patience hold far greater power. The community had witnessed it firsthand. I had witnessed it firsthand. And for the first time in years, the valley felt like it truly belonged to me, not just on paper, but in reality. The final piece of satisfaction came unexpectedly. A few neighbors who had once feared Karen approached me privately, apologizing for not questioning her sooner, and expressing relief that the truth had been revealed. Some even admitted that they had been inspired by my perseverance, realizing that standing up to intimidation was not only possible but necessary. Their acknowledgement was a quiet reward, one that felt just as important as the legal victory. By the end of the week, life had returned to a new kind of normal. The valley was peaceful, and I was free. HOA Karen was no longer a looming threat, she was a cautionary tale. The power of truth, patience, and preparation had prevailed. And I knew, deep down, that even if she tried to rise again, the community and I were prepared. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly, and the valley would remain mine. Sitting on the porch that night, I let the wind wash over me, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. The stars sparkled above the mountains, serene and eternal. I felt a profound sense of closure, not just for the cabin, the valley, or the conflict, but for myself. I had endured years of harassment, manipulation, and intimidation. I had faced them all calmly, strategically, and with patience. And now, finally, I had won. This wasn't just a victory over one person. It was a victory over fear, over manipulation, and over the belief that control could be maintained through intimidation alone. The valley was mine, legally and socially, and the community had witnessed it. HOA Karen had lost everything she had relied on to maintain her authority. And I had gained not only the valley, but the respect, peace, and sense of justice I had fought for so long to reclaim. As I finally turned inside the cabin that night, I felt a calm satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in years. The valley was quiet, my land was secure, and the community had begun to see the truth. I had faced the storm, endured the harassment, and emerged victorious. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges might come in the future, I had the resilience, the preparation, and the patience to handle them. The valley was mine, and it always would be.